The sun rose over the high towers of Valoria City, throwing gold light over white stone walls and silver rooftops. The people in the city began their day with cheer. But inside the royal palace, quiet filled the long halls. Princess Leora stood by the wide balcony, watching the city below. She was young, proud, and known by everyone for her brave heart. Her eyes were calm but strong. Many said she had the same fearless spirit as her mother, Queen Isabel. Leora had grown up among guards, teachers, and wise council members. They taught her how to rule, how to speak with power, and how to stay calm even when the world was not. She listened well, but she also thought for herself. When she was small, she once told the queen she did not want to be only polite and kind. She wanted to be strong enough to protect her people. Queen Isabel had smiled then and said, "A crown is only as strong as the head that wears it." From that day, Leora worked to become both wise and brave. The kingdom of Valoria was the heart of humankind's worlds. It ruled many colonies far beyond the home planet. From ships flying through the black space, captains brought silver, food, and news back to the capital. The throne of Valoria was respected and sometimes feared, but in recent years, uneasy voices had begun to rise. The outer colonies spoke of loneliness and unfair laws. Merchants grumbled that the royal tax was heavy. Workers said they were forgotten. The queen's guards tried to keep peace, but unrest was spreading fast. Leora often listened to these reports. She would sit beside her mother in the round hall of the council. Their old men in robes talked for hours. They spoke of numbers, trade, and politics. They argued about leaders from the colonies. Leora noticed that, while they spoke of peace, they rarely acted with it. The princess could see worry growing in the queen's face each day. It troubled her heart, too. She wished to help, but did not yet know how. That afternoon, Leora walked through the royal gardens. Winds carried the sweet smell of star lilies, flowers that only grew in Valoria's clear air. She passed by the fountain where she used to play as a child. The light sparkled in the water, and for a moment, she wished life could be simple again. But life had changed. She was now 20, and she knew every step she took was watched by eyes that looked for weakness or strength. A young page came running toward her. He bowed and spoke quickly. "Your Highness, the Queen asks for you in the Chamber of Stars. There is news from the frontier colonies." Leora thanked him and went at once. In the chamber, Queen Isabel stood beside a large map that showed glowing lights of the worlds under human control. Around the table stood royal advisors, all talking at once. When Leora entered, the Queen lifted her hand for silence. She looked at her daughter. Her voice was firm but gentle. "My dear, the colony of Meriden is in trouble. Fights have begun between the settlers and the royal guards. Our ambassadors have failed. I fear war if we stay still." Leora stepped closer. "Then we cannot stay still," she said softly. "If they believe we have forgotten them, someone must go and speak for Valoria. Someone who listens." An old advisor frowned. It is too dangerous for a princess to go. The frontier is wild. The people there trust no one from the capital." Leora looked ready to answer, but her mother spoke first. "Perhaps that is why my daughter should go. She has never looked down on anyone. The people might see her heart before they see her crown." The room was silent. The queen turned to her with eyes that held both pride and fear. "Leora, if you go, you will not go alone. I will assign you a protector, one who knows the frontier far better than we do." Leora nodded once, without hesitation. "I will go. If peace can be saved by words, I will find them." That night, as the stars rose, she walked again to the balcony. The city lights shimmered like a sea of fireflies. She felt the cool wind against her face. Tomorrow her life would change forever. Beyond those bright towers awaited unknown lands, danger, and people who might see her only as a symbol of power. But she stood tall, her eyes heavy with thought, ready to face what lay ahead. And far away, across the deep black sky, a man named Daniel Hart read his new orders to escort the royal envoy. He did not know the princess he was to guard, and she did not yet know him. But their paths were drawing close, pulled together by fate's quiet hand. Captain Daniel Hart stood on the open deck of his ship, watching the clouds drift far below. His ship was small and old, built for border patrol and escort duty. The paint had faded, the metal worn smooth from years of travel. Still, it flew true, and Daniel trusted it more than he trusted most people. He had spent many years in the skies, far from the grand towers of Valoria. Life at the edges of human space was hard, but it taught him courage, patience, and caution. He had seen too many peaceful missions turn into conflicts, and too many proud leaders lose their way. So when he received orders to escort the royal envoy, he felt uneasy. He had never met a princess, and did not plan to start admiring one. Rumors said they were delicate and proud, full of rules that made no sense to ordinary workers. Still, orders were orders, and Daniel obeyed orders. He read the mission note again. It was simple. Asterisk, provides safe passage for Princess Leora of Valoria to the frontier colonies. Asterisk, his crew prepared at once. They cleaned the ship, stocked supplies, and checked engines. Everyone was curious and nervous at the same time. It was rare that someone from the palace came so far out. The next day, before sunrise, the royal transport arrived. The sound of the engines was smooth and rich like music. Daniel stood ready on the landing path as the doors opened. From the bright light stepped Princess Leora, dressed in plain travel clothes. Her hair was tied back, and she carried herself with quiet pride. She looked around the rough airfield, then at Daniel. Her eyes were deep and sharp, calm but full of strength. For a moment, Daniel forgot how to salute. Then he caught himself and bowed. "Captain Hart," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for meeting me. I hope your ship will not mind one more passenger." Daniel almost smiled. "Your Highness, my ship has seen worse than a royal guest. She's old, but she's steady." Leora gave a small nod. "Then she is like her captain." The crew behind Daniel tried to hide their smiles. The young princess had answered faster than they expected, and the captain had no answer for once. He motioned politely to the ramp and said, "Please, Your Highness, welcome aboard." As the ship lifted into the sky, Leora stood near the window, watching Valoria grow smaller beneath the clouds. The towers, the gardens, and the wide rivers all faded away until only the stars remained. For the first time in her life, there were no guards lining the halls, no servants waiting with trays, no quiet songs in the palace. Only the hum of the ship's engines and the endless dark outside. She watched the stars and said softly, "They look close enough to touch." Daniel, standing beside her, glanced at the stars and said, "Out here they feel close, but they always stay far away. It's how it keeps people humble." She looked at him, curious. "Do you find them humbling, Captain?" He gave a slow breath. "Every time. It's the day I stop feeling that way, I'll stop flying." From that moment, Leora began to respect him. It was direct, maybe too direct, but honest. During the voyage, she listened to the talk of the crew, shared meals with them, and asked questions about their stories. At first they were shy, unsure of how to speak to royalty.
Dad.
But her kind smile and simple manners soon broke the wall. Even Daniel found himself talking more than he planned. They spoke of life beyond the royal borders of trade ships, and lonely outposts, and of the workers who felt left behind. Sometimes Leora went to the control deck to watch Daniel work. He handled the ship with skill that came from long experience. He gave orders calmly and always treated his crew with respect. She could tell that they trusted him deeply. Once, when a small meteor storm hit, she saw him steer through danger without fear. After it passed, she looked at him and said, "You make it look easy." He shook his head. "It's never easy. But it gets easier when you stop thinking about the risk and focus on the goal." Leora smiled slightly. "That sounds like advice for more than flying." The next day, they received their first message from the frontier. The colony of Meriden was restless. The people refused to meet with royal ambassadors, claiming they wanted freedom from Valoria's rule. Some groups had taken control of mining stations. The Queen's earlier envoys were forced to leave. Daniel knew this mission was going to be harder than anyone in the royal court believed. He told Leora as much, expecting her to hesitate, but she did not. "If they are angry," she said, "then someone must listen to that anger. I will speak with them myself." Daniel paused. "They might not want to talk. They might see only a crown sitting across from them. Then I will make them see a person," she said quietly. Her words left him silent. For the rest of the journey, he found himself watching her more often. She studied reports, learned names of colony leaders, even practiced local speech patterns. She wanted to understand, not just command. Daniel felt a strange sense of pride, though he did not show it. He began to think that maybe this mission had a chance after all. After 2 weeks in space, the ship neared Meridian. Through the wide glass dome, the planet appeared below, a world of gray mountains and silver rivers, beautiful and cold. Daniel took the landing controls, while the princess stood beside him, her hands steady at her sides. The ship descended through clouds toward the busy lights on the ground. Somewhere down there waited rebels, soldiers, and a people uncertain of their future. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. Both knew that everything they did next would shape the destiny of 2 worlds and perhaps their own hearts as well. The ship landed on the metal runway of Meridian as the morning light touched the horizon. The sky was pale and gray, and cold winds swept across the landing field. Princess Leora stepped down first, followed by Captain Daniel Hart and his crew. Soldiers watched from a distance, their faces tight with suspicion. The royal banners on the ship seemed out of place among the steel buildings and rough workers moving in the streets beyond. Daniel noticed the tense silence that surrounded them. "They are not welcoming us," he murmured. Leora looked back at him, her voice calm. "Then it is time to show them that we came to listen, not to rule." They walked through the main settlement. The ground was dusty, and the people stopped their work to stare at the group. Many whispered. Some bowed slightly, but others turned away. The difference between Valoria's shining towers and this cold mining world was too clear to hide. Inside the local government hall, a few officials waited, wearing worn uniforms. The man in charge, Governor Wren, greeted them stiffly. "Your Highness, Captain, the colony is unsettled. Workers have lost trust. The taxes are high, supplies slow, and promises late. I fear we are close to losing order." Leora listened carefully, asking quiet questions. She did not take notes or speak of power. Instead, she asked about the miners' homes, their food, their families. The governor seemed surprised by her concern. Many from the capital had come before her, but none had stayed to ask or listen with patience. After the meeting, Daniel followed her outside. The streets were thin with dust and lined with small shops. Smoke rose from the factories nearby. Leora paused beside a child playing with broken metal pieces like tiny toys. She knelt down and smiled at the child. The little one looked up, confused, then smiled back. For a moment, Daniel saw something change in the eyes of the people near them. As they walked on, a group of miners approached, rough and uncertain. Their leader, a tall man with deep lines on his face, stopped in front of Leora. "Are you truly the princess?" he asked. "I am," she said. "Then tell me why now? Why send you after years of silence?" His tone was not unkind, but full of pain. Leora nodded slowly. "Because silence was a mistake," she said. "I want to correct it. I cannot do that without hearing you." The man stared at her, as if trying to see whether this simple answer could be true. Finally, he said, "We will see if your words stay true when the council meets. Come tomorrow and speak to the miners yourself." She agreed at once. Daniel waited until they were back at the lodging to speak. "You realize that meeting might turn into trouble," he said quietly. "Not everyone there will want peace." "I know," Leora said. "That is why I must go. If they see that I am not afraid of them, it might change something." Her tone was so firm that Daniel could not argue. That night the settlement stayed restless. From their window, Daniel could see groups of people gathering near fires, speaking in low voices. He ordered half the crew to stay alert. Inside the small room, Leora read the reports again, tracing her finger over maps of the colony. Her eyes were tired, but her spirit did not fade. After a moment, Daniel spoke. "You were not trained for this kind of world, yet you stand as if you were born to it." She smiled faintly. "I had many teachers, but none could teach me what happens here. I am learning from every face I see." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You remind me of the first days I flew in command. I acted fearless, but deep down, I was uncertain. I hid it behind work. You don't hide yours, you turn it into strength." Leora looked out the window and said softly, "Fear is only dangerous when it keeps us from moving forward." The next morning, the meeting began in the wide hall of the Miners' Union. The crowd pressed close, filling every space. Rough voices called out questions, some angry, some pleading. Leora stepped forward without guards. She stood on the platform, her small figure facing hundreds of faces hardened by struggle. "I did not come to bring more words from the capital," she said. "I came to hear yours." She asked them to tell their needs and their pain. Slowly, the hall turned quiet. Men and women spoke in turnabout, lost wages, broken machines, and the feeling of being forgotten. She listened to each story, replying with genuine care. Daniel watched from the side, his hand near his weapon just in case. But as hours passed, no violence came. He saw faces soften, and even the most doubtful people began to nod. When it ended, the miners agreed to meet again in peace, to plan a new treaty between the colony and the throne. Outside, the sky of Meriden had cleared a little. As Leora and Daniel walked back to the ship, he glanced at her and said, "You turned a storm into a quiet wind." Did not think that was possible. She smiled, a little tired but content. "No storm lasts forever, Captain. Someone only needs to stand through it until it passes." He said nothing after that. But he could not stop thinking how right she was. The princess from the shining city had faced the dust and anger of the frontier and found her place among them. Without realizing it, Daniel had begun to admire her more deeply than he could admit. And somewhere in that silent respect, something new began to grow, strong and quiet. Like the first light after a long night. The days that followed were tense but full of hope. The Miners' Council had agreed to send representatives to meet with Princess Leora again. For the first time in many years, people from both sides of the colony were willing to talk instead of fight. Still, Captain Daniel Hart felt uneasy. He had seen calm moments like this turn into chaos before. Peace was fragile in rough lands like Meriden. Leora spent her mornings visiting the work sites. She walked among miners, spoke to engineers, and watched the long machines dig deep into the rocky ground. Many workers were surprised to see her there with dust on her shoes and hair blown by wind. She did not arrive with guards or symbols of rank. She only asked questions and listened carefully. A few even dared to smile when she passed, though they pretended not to care. Daniel followed her everywhere, keeping an eye on rooftops and dark corners. Her bravery impressed him more each day, though it also made him nervous. One afternoon, news arrived that some rebel groups refused to join the talks. They planned to attack the meeting hall to make sure no agreement could happen. When Daniel told Leora, she went silent for a long time. Then she said, "If we hide, they will call us cowards. If we meet, they might attack. But I believe more people want peace than war. We cannot run now." Daniel shook his head. "You're stubborn, princess." She smiled slightly. "Learn from the best." He sighed and began to organize the crew. By the next morning, the meeting place was ready. It was an old storage hall, rebuilt into a simple room with long benches. Dust hung in the air, but the people came, both workers and officials. The Queen's seal hung quietly at the front of the room, small and plain. Daniel and his crew guarded the doors while Leora stood at the center table. At first, the talk went well. Leora spoke about shared duty, about building a future where the colonies would have more voice, more fairness. The workers' leaders spoke honestly, their stormy words softening over time. But before long, an explosion shook the ground. The doors at the end of the hall burst open, and masked men rushed in with weapons raised. Panic spread through the crowd. Daniel reacted instantly, pulling Leora behind him as shouts filled the room. Shots echoed, and guards took positions. He pushed her toward the side exit, his heart racing. "Stay down," he shouted, leading her through falling debris. One of his men helped a group of workers escape, while Daniel covered their path. Outside, smoke rose into the gray sky. The attack had been sudden and fierce. Daniel and Leora ran toward the ruined square behind the hall, but more rebels appeared, surrounding them. He aimed his weapon while she looked at the frightened faces of the attackers. "Wait!" she cried out. Her voice carried power even through fear. "This will not give you freedom, it will only give you pain." For a brief moment, her words stopped them. Daniel saw hesitation in their eyes, but one rebel fired, the blast striking dangerously close. Daniel shielded her with his own body and fired back, forcing the attackers to retreat. As silence slowly returned, the captain felt the sting of heat on his arm. A piece of metal had caught him. Blood ran down his sleeve. Leora knelt beside him. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, wincing. "I've had worse. We need to move before they return." She tore a piece of her cloak and wrapped his wound quickly. Her hands were steady. "Then we move together," she said. By nightfall, they made it back to the main building, where confused guards were gathering survivors. Inside, workers were tending to the injured, both rebel and royal. Leora helped carry water and supplies without thinking of her rank. When someone whispered that the princess should rest, she shook her head. "I will rest when everyone here can sleep without fear." Later, Daniel watched her speak again to the crowd. Despite the pain, despite the danger, her voice was steady. "Today we saw what anger does, but we also saw what courage can do. The future of this colony will not be written by fear. It will be written by all of us together. I will stay here until it is done." Her words reached everyone in the hall. Even the rebels who had been captured lowered their eyes. Many people began to see her not as a princess from far away, but as one of them, a woman who had stood in the smoke beside them and did not run. When the room finally grew quiet, Daniel sat nearby, feeling tired but strangely proud. He had protected her, but it was she who had saved everyone's hope. He looked at the young woman standing near the broken window, her face silver in the moonlight. Her courage seemed to fill the room more than the light itself. In that silent moment, Daniel understood something he had tried to ignore. His respect for her had turned into something deeper, quieter, and stronger than he wanted to admit. But he would not speak of it, not yet. The mission was not over, and the world outside still waited for their next move. For now, he simply stood beside her, the wounded captain and the determined princess, both breathing the same cold night air. And though the streets were wounded and the city still burned in places for the first time since they had arrived, Daniel felt there was truly a chance for peace and a reason worth fighting for. The morning after the attack was calm. Smoke still curled from broken buildings, and the air carried the sharp smell of metal and ash. People worked silently to clear the streets. Princess Leora walked among them, her gown dark with soot and dust. She helped lift beams, guided children to safety, and gave quiet words of comfort to the injured. No one called her Your Highness anymore. They called her by her name, as if she were one of their own. Captain Daniel Hart watched her move from group to group, his arm bandaged from the wound he had taken. He wondered where she found such strength. She had not slept, yet she stood taller than any soldier there. When she saw him watching, she smiled faintly and said, "You should be resting, and leave you to build a new world without me." Daniel answered, his tone light, though his eyes were serious. She shook her head with a tired laugh. "You always find a reason not to rest, Captain. I could say the same about you." "Princess," that short moment of humor was a small relief amid the ruin. The two of them stood in silence, watching the people rebuild together. Workers, guards, and even former rebels filled the streets, hauling equipment or repairing lights. For the first time, Meriden felt like one community instead of two sides of a war. By midday, a message came from the capital. The Queen had heard of the attack and the princess's bravery. She sent a coded message asking when Leora would return. Leora read the words slowly. "The Queen fears for my safety," she said quietly. Daniel asked, "Will you go back?" Leora folded the message and looked at the dusty horizon. "I will return when the treaty is signed, not before." Over the following days, new talks began. Leora met with the miners' leaders and the royal governors in a rebuilt chamber. This time there were no guards, no banners, and no threats. Only honest negotiation. She spoke gently but firmly, promising that Valoria would lower taxes, send fair aid, and let local councils hold more power. In return, the colony agreed to stay within the rule of the crown and support peace among the outer worlds. It took many long nights, but at last, all sides signed the new accords. When the final document was sealed, the hall erupted in cheers. Men and women who had once shouted in anger now shouted in joy. Leora stood still for a moment, her eyes shining. Daniel felt something rise in his chest that felt like deep pride. He stepped forward and said quietly, "You did it." She turned to him. "We did it." A few days later, the Queen's main fleet arrived to confirm the peace and bring her daughter home. The people gathered to see the princess off. Many gave her handmade gifts from the furnaces and mined small pieces of silver shaped into stars and hearts. As she walked through the crowd, she promised them she would never forget Meriden. At the landing field, Daniel stood by the ship, waiting. The sun was low, painting the sky in red and gold. Leora walked toward him, her cloak fluttering in the wind. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "You saved my life, Daniel. More than once." He shook his head. "You saved mine in more ways than one." She smiled, though her eyes were bright with sadness. "When I return to Valoria, things will not be simple, and there will be those who dislike what I have done." Daniel nodded. "Then keep doing it. The right path is rarely the easiest one." They stood close, silent for several heartbeats. Then she said softly, "I will never forget the man who stood with me when the world seemed against us, and I will never forget the woman who made me believe peace was possible." He wanted to say more, but words seemed too small. Instead, he gave a simple bow, and she placed her hand over his in quiet thanks. Then she turned and walked up the ramp, the light behind her like fire on the horizon. As the engines roared to life, Daniel raised his hand in farewell. The ship rose higher, leaving lines of smoke across the copper skies. For a long time he watched until it became a small bright dot against the clouds, then nothing at all. Dot. When the sound finally faded, he stood alone in the silent field. Round him, the colony was alive with new energy. People worked together, hopeful again. He smiled faintly, thinking of her words and the look in her eyes before she left. In Valoria months later, songs were written about the young princess who faced danger for peace and the captain who guarded her with courage. Children whispered tales of the day she stood firm against rebellion and changed the fate of 2 worlds. But Daniel, hearing those stories from far away, remembered the truth more simply. She was not a legend of marble and gold. She was a real person, strong, kind, and brave. The one who had taught him that power and gentleness could live in the same heart. As the evening wind blew soft across the sands of Meriden, Daniel looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, she was ruling again, maybe thinking of this place as he was thinking of her. And though distance stretched between them, both carried the same quiet promise to protect what they had built and to remember each other always. The peace they made endured, and the stories of the princess and the captain lived on. They were 2 different worlds joined by courage and trust, and while time would go on and new rulers would rise, their names remained as a shining reminder that understanding, not power, is what truly holds the stars together.